Okay, 28 December. Weekly Marx. Yesterday I bored people to tears and arrived late and uh yammered on about the editor's notes for volume 1, chapter 1 of Marx's Capital, the Princeton edition, the new Princeton edition. So uh I won't do it verbatim, namely because I don't want to show how bad I can translate German. But today I'm going to talk about that plus some other stuff. So I hopefully I can blow through the volume 1, chapter 1 um, editor's notes without a lot of fanfare. So it has various elements to it. And let's see, where did I leave off yesterday? I'll try and scroll through this as quickly as possible. I think the important thing is that in the editor's notes, we have different ways in which we can talk about appearance and Hegelian issues related to that things that appear as something are, they have this element to them that I think is important. It is uh, more palpable but less ephemeral. I know that doesn't sound quite right, but it is talking about a way of thinking that is about sort of um, active engagement. Let's put it that way. It without lapsing into an entire discussion about how one attends to something. That's kind of important. And you could couch this in aesthetic terms. You could also say that um, what Marx is doing in this particular process is talking about the similar argument, and I'm not saying it's identical to it, but you know, certain types of people who believe in a sort of a theistic view of the universe, and I'm not even suggesting that Marx is even engaging that, but the argument for intelligent design or the argument from design, that is that there's some sky entity that controls everything. That's not where Marx is, and for obvious reasons. But there is this idea that um, that that there is a kind of design at work, or um, designing. Let's put it that way. So anyway, I'm sort of stalling. The capital system, this is note 13, I think. The capital system depends on appearances. Marx makes the point already in the book's first sentence. The basic intuition is that the capital system is not transparent, much like religion as Marx sees it. The capital system hides some of its operations. It depends on looking different than it is. It is easier to see the priest's tithe, he jokes, than the blessing that he promises. As in some religions, looking different is part of how capitalism operates. Things appear as other things. Appearances derived from the system itself. It ceaselessly throws off appearances without which it wouldn't be able to function. Capitalists need to see value as coming from their activities. Laborers need to see wages as fair recompense for their labor. Consumers need to look at a sandwich and see food, not value. The main mechanisms that depend on appearance in this volume are commodity fetishism, chapter 1, and the wage form, chapter 17. Both of these capitalistic phenomena have appearance. German Erscheinung as a necessary part of their functioning. Because they don't understand this kind of appearance, the vulgar economists remain with something less than appearances, in German signaled in the word Schein, as opposed to Erscheinung. What is Marx's overall attitude towards appearance? In crediting appearance as real, he follows a development in modern philosophy. Kant raised Erscheinung above mere shine when he defined human cognition as limited to what can legitimately appear to it. Kant called Erscheinung any humanly experienceable phenomenon and opposed it to a thing in itself that can never be experienced directly. This is, problematic if, if you're talking about certain types of ideas that are Kantian, sublime, etc. Kant's theory revised ancient Hellenic reasoning going back to Parmenides' 6th century BCE philosophical poem and systematized in Plato's writing of the late 5th and early 4th centuries BCE that held appearances to be opposed to truth, being, and reality. In order to make knowledge scientific, Kant discovers that he has to make appearances into a kind of reality for human cognition. Hegel changes this around somewhat, taking an even more positive view of appearance. Essence must appear, he writes in the Logic, and in the Encyclopedia, he elaborates that essence is not behind or beyond appearance. An essence without an appearance is blind, an appearance without an essence is empty. Essences are in their appearances, and reality is the multiple possible appearances of something. Hegel's demand that appearance itself must be taken as essential stands close to Marx's use of the term, but Marx changes the territory from general metaphysics to a specific historical form. Appearance is essential to capitalism, and he agrees with Hegel that appearance is objective, not subjective. It is neither my personal illusion nor a limitation in human cognition that makes things appear one way and also be another. This means that we cannot simply correct our thinking using philosophy to move to a truer vision. We can, however, understand the fact that appearance is a necessary part of the system and understand that the true movements go together with their appearances. Understanding this complex structure will not remove the appearances as it would if it were simply a correction of bad thinking or false perception. To change the system, it's not enough to raise consciousness or portray it as it really is. This system really is commodity form and wage form. Its reality is both what it actually is and how it appears. Marx makes this clear with his use of the important term of art, Einstellung form, that is, form of appearance. Forms of appearance are many and are continually being invented by the system. Value, that is, the big V value, for example, has many forms of appearance. It appears as use value and exchange value, and exchange value can appear as a commodity, including labor or money. Number 14, Marx's word for labor power, Arbeitskraft, has a more standard meaning in German, can mean workforce, designating the group that goes out to work, or something like the number of people needed to get something done, similar to manpower in English. But Marx gives a distinctive meaning to the word. Arbeitskraft refers to an abstraction that capital makes. Within the particular work of a person laboring to produce a particular object, the capital system projects a special substance that is general and exchangeable. Marx calls that projected substance labor power, right? This is that thing that we've talked about before, that their labor is not the same as labor power. This idea is ripe for critique to Marx since it is labor power as a tool of capital that allows workers to work more than they are paid for. You can argue a variety of ways about this. One way in thinking about labor power is that it's a set of expectations about labor rather than the labor itself. Number 15, Edmund Cartwright invented the mechanical loom in 1785. By 1830, the steam-powered mechanical loom was playing a key part in England's textile production. In 1829, the power looms in England and Scotland numbered more than 55,000. This massively disrupted the textile industry on the continent, too, leading to the uprising of the Silesian weavers in 1844, an event that Marx embraced as pivotal for the German proletariat. It also occasioned one of the most famous poems about modern workers in revolt, Heinrich Heine's The Silesian Weavers of 1844. Note number 16. Despite the quotation marks, Marx has actually altered his own formulation here. The one he's citing, that is, that a word-for-word translation of the original line would read, with respect to their exchange value. This is due to the fact that Marx didn't begin to strictly distinguish between value, that is, objectified, abstract, socially necessary human labor, that is SNL, and exchange value. This is due to the fact that Marx didn't begin to strictly distinguish between value and exchange value. That is, exchange value is one of value's forms of appearance until the second edition of Capital. So there's a lot of revision between the first and second edition, which is why the editors, the translators for this edition chose the 1867 second edition of Capital. An uncommon German word, Festgeranen, employed most often in literary contexts and with reference to blood, signifies the hardening of something that had been flowing. Its root rinnen is related to the word rennen, which means to run. Note number 17, the significance of technology. The term Marx uses here changed as he wrote and revised Capital. It actually began to feel old-fashioned, which is why it occurs less often in the 1872 edition of Capital than it does in the 1867 edition, 21 times versus 54. For the most part, Marx simply replaced it with technische, or technisch, which therefore experienced the opposite fate, going from 24 instances in the 1867 edition to 56 in the 1872 one. But what these terms in fact signified also changed. Marx sometimes employs technologisch in the cameralist sense, where it refers primarily to the study of useful devices rather than to the devices themselves. However, he also edges the term towards its modern meaning, especially in chapter 13, the machines chapter. In a well-known footnote, he laments the lack of a critical history of technology, kritische Geschichte der Technologie, analogous to Darwin's history of nature's technology, as he puts it. Because Marx goes on to speak of what technology reveals, it is possible to argue that he's still using technology to name an area of study. But it seems more likely that he was operating somewhat inconsistently with a term whose meaning was very much in flux. With technisch, which today can mean either technical or technological, Marx sometimes refers to the skills a given form of labor requires, and sometimes to the useful devices that help drive the capital's process of production. Eric Schottberg's book, Technology: Critical History of a Concept, offers a compact but informative account of technic and technologisch in Capital. Note 18, it's probable that in all ages, those metals will cost more in their production than their value ever repaid. Technical note 19, this appears to be a reference to a reference in his lectures on colonization and colonies, which Marx had read. Herman Merivale remarks, according to M. Eschwege, about 20,000 Negroes were still employed by it in 1823. He estimates the total value of diamond workings in 80 years at a sum hardly exceeding 18 months' produce of sugar or coffee in Brazil. Let's see. I'm going to skip a couple of these things because they're kind of short. But in 21, the term translated as natural resources is Naturstoff, which Marx uses with shifting points of emphasis. Hence, it is translated in different ways, sometimes natural resources and elsewhere as natural materials. Stoff, which also occurs in this section, is rendered most often as matter. These terms, of course, go with the word Stoffwechsel, which we will discuss in the next note, 22. Here, Marx uses for the first time in Capital, the term Stoffwechsel, which could also be translated as exchange of matter or matter exchange. In a later chapter, Marx pairs it with Formwechsel or change of form. The term Stoffwechsel gained currency in the 1830s and 1840s when the German natural scientists Friedrich Tiedemann and Justus von Liebig, and von Liebig is really important for Marx in terms of soil science, used it to describe vital processes of substance, conversion, and physiology. The Greek-derived English term metabolism, now the standard translation for Stoffwechsel, wasn't employed widely until after 1900, and thus it could be considered an anachronistic rendering of Marx's use of Stoffwechsel in 1867 and 1872. Franklin C. Byng provides a helpful sketch of the early history of the English term in this article, The Origin of the Word Metabolism, in the Journal of History of Medicine from 1971. The French edition of Capital uses plain language for Stoffwechsel, that is, la circulation matérielle. 23, in his work, A Treatise of Taxes and Contributions, published anonymously in 1647, Petty writes, "Here we are to remember, in consequence of our opinion, that labor is the father and active principle of wealth, as lands are the mother that the state, by killing, mutilating, or imprisoning, do withal punish themselves." Barnworth is 24, commodity value, which is unusual. Formwechsel, the term rendered as shape-shifting, is otherwise translated as form change. And just as a note here, you can see the subtlety, the nuances that exist in German that don't necessarily come forth or need to be sort of identified in English, noting, of course, that time passes, and as they note, there are, certain diachronic changes that occur in the language that, it is idiomatic in that sense. Number 26, and in the passage to which Marx refers us in the footnote, Hegel distinguishes among the person, the citizen, and the human being, which he defines as follows. It's from the standpoint of needs that we speak of the human being in this sense. 27. So, in its capacity as abstract human labor, labor creates, bildet, community value, den Warenwert. While in its capacity as concrete useful labor, it produces use value. Bildet, a form of the verb bilden, has a wide range of meanings. That is, shape, form, cultivate, make up, constitute, create, develop. Hence, Bildungsroman and more. Marx uses it to say that abstract human labor is what creates or constitutes or forms the substance of value. It is important to recognize that abstract, not concrete labor alone creates value. And so a quasi-Ricardian labor theory of value in which particular labor goes to a use value and makes its value is not what Marx means here. This might be somewhat confusing since earlier in the chapter, Marx calls useful labor die Bilderin, the creator of use values, thereby establishing an association among the Bilden word family, that is, labor and the creation values in general. We should note, however, that Marx is not completely consistent with his terminology regarding the creation of value. He sometimes speaks of the production of values, in fact. Now, this moment, then note 28, is a kind of idea that I've mentioned before and that I hope we can continue to think about, only because it's a kind of interesting construction or a neologism. That is, value is a teletechnology that allows one thing to be exchanged for a qualitatively different thing at a distance of time and space without significant loss. In the Capital Project, value is the main object of study, but the idea of teletechnology is interesting. Although a technology, it isn't purely or even primarily physical, even if it often counts on physical bearers like commodities or coins or concrete labor. Value is as much an idea as a thing, as much a phantasm in the mind as a practical commitment by everyone involved, as much a general feature of the system as an individual quasi-immaterial substance actually existing and realized in a purchase, sale, or trade. When I buy something, I obtain the thing, and I also obtain mysteriously its value, a hypothesized amount of something that exists in two different things, which adheres to my purchase in a ghostly fashion and is ready later to leap over if I sell it to another item I get in return. Although words relating to value have existed since European antiquity, value or wert changes its meaning radically in the capital system. In Aristotle's philosophy, value was a share in justice. For actors in the marketplace, just meant having an equal amount before and after a transaction. This is, Aristotle and the Nicomachean Ethics. Value meant you got what you pay for. In other words, in the ancient Stoic school, individual good things, which always fell short of the universal and impossible ideal of the good, were to be judged according to their relative worthiness of being pursued for a good life. You prefer this thing over that thing because it's worth it for the good life you want. Nowhere previously, however, did value make up the specific kind of teletechnology it became under capital. A medium for communicating the homogenized, generalized, standardized labor involved in the production of a commodity to be realized in exchange. Marx considers this idea the most peculiar in the whole system and the most radical of its discoveries. Even though concrete work and material exchanges are necessary for this kind of economy to function, value is peculiar because through all the changes of raw materials into finished products and the exchanges of goods for other goods, value remains abstract yet quasi-material, invisible yet present, and although transiting through multiple forms remains somehow always the same thing, and always the same amount of that thing when subject to certain laws. Value looks like the last metaphysical entity in the most practical material zone, the economy. Now, that may seem a little, out there, but I think when you think about, what kind of normal sets of transactions you engage in, particularly in a not just a production space, but in a consumption space or in a distribution space. And yes, you can say that those are kind of three different things on the one hand. On the other hand, they share certain common properties, and you could say that those things are going on. It is important to note the difference between value and wealth. Wealth is an accumulated stock of riches that allows a person to live comparatively better or to undertake comparatively bigger projects. A pauper's wealth buys bread. A king's finances, a war. You can think of wealth as accumulated purchasing power. Value, on the other hand, is first of all a social form. It is the medium for human interaction under this system. Instead of meeting face to face, social actors meet at a distance through the medium of value. Laborers meet their bosses, sellers meet buyers, intermediate sellers meet intermediate sellers, and retailers meet consumers through the value that is exchanged, although they may never meet face to face. Indeed, because of value, and because value is the impersonal medium and the goal of the system, people do not meet even when they do meet. Now, that's an interesting idea there. The crucial part of their interaction is always the value that moves through it. Second of all, value is not a natural feature of the world or a fixture in economics, but a historical anomaly marking a particular epoch. Other kinds of social arrangements do not, and will not need value in this sense. It rankles Marx that classical political economists naturalize value and then conceive of political economy as the study of an eternal phenomenon, and their method as a positivism. To tell how value is produced and subsequently to tell how to produce it better. For Marx, value is a construct invented by the system and apotheosized by economists. They name, naturalize, and prop up this feature of the system. Value is real, but only in the system. In fact, it is the system's linchpin, which is why the critique of political economy aims to expose value as historically limited and conceptually foggy, aiming to pull the linchpin. Now, I know that's getting out there, but I think you need to get a sense of where how the translators are sort of thinking about this. Third of all, value, which is made in this system, although it does not mean it is made up, is made out of particular ingredients. It is tempting to think of value as something physically injected into products by workers. Marx does say that workers transfer the energy of their bodies and the skills of their know-how into products, but this is misleading. It is true that Marx wants to open up the hidden abode of production in order to put workers back at the source of value production. Yet it is not their concrete labor, what he calls the private activity of a worker on materials, and it is also not the useful item that results that create value. One process, human work that works a material into a useful thing, transforms into another process, that is, value creation. Capital does this. Goods get work and value gets created at the same time. It is indisputable that value is created in part out of worked goods. How it is created out of concrete labor and its products requires a different explanation, however. Through exchange on a big market, the labor market, labor becomes homogenized and abstracted, losing its particularity. It becomes a quantitatively measured expenditure of labor in general, measured by homogenized standard clock time. In this way, labor itself becomes treated as a commodity, as uniform, undifferentiated, comparable with all other labor on the market, and like other commodities, it is thus exchangeable with all other kinds of labor on the market. Now, exchange value is value's form of appearance, one of its forms, but what is exchanged in exchange under capital, just as ultimately what is produced in production, is ultimately the pseudo-metaphysical thing, value. Further, value can stand on its own. It commandeers an already existing form, money, and bends that form to its own uses. Previously a means of exchange, a tool of account, or a medium for storing wealth, money now represents and actually embodies value. Now, this is one of the main innovations in Marx's analysis. Two terms, value form and form of appearance, change the way we see value. First of all, value is historically contingent in existence. It's only under capitalism that economic and social relations take the form of value. And secondly, value is polyform and it mutates. The system's flexibility depends on this. Value takes the form of raw materials, a finished commodity, a thing for use, a thing for exchange, money, credit, and so on. It remains value through all its forms, which are the forms of appearance of what functions as a stable substance, although, as Marx argues, its substantiality is a feature of this system alone. Money and the value that appears in that form is a different perversion of individual and social life than that older Marxian keyword alienated labor was. When he wrote about alienation in 1843 to 44, he had not yet decided that the characteristic feature of capitalist sociality was abstraction from qualitative differences among different kinds of labor and kinds of things in a homogenized pseudo soul of the world. He had not yet discovered the real figment, value substance. Maybe because the way it distorts human sociality is harder to see and harder to combat. Alienation gives way in the later critique of political economy to value forms and their intertransformations. Now, I know that may seem complicated, but it's worth thinking about, I hope. One further note, debates over the labor theory of value have been fashionable since soon after publication of the first edition of the book and continue today, but they are by and large disconnected from what Marx says about value. In the main, worries about the labor theory of value derive from prior commitment to another school of thought. Today, the mainstream understanding of value comes from marginalist theory, invented in several places at once during Marx's late years, although it is unclear whether he knew about the development of the time. William Stanley Jevons, Leon Walras, Karl Menger, and later Alfred Marshall theorized value as a measure of the marginal utility of goods in psychological assessment by consumers. As a reflex, because of the popularity in psychological assessment, As a reflex, because of the popularity of the school and its explanation of value, Marx's arguments were assimilated to those of David Ricardo and the Ricardians, when in truth, he departed from them starkly. Put briefly, Adam Smith thought value was equal to the cost of production, which added up to its natural price, quote unquote. Ricardo had a quote unquote costs of production theory as well, but for him, the labor input was the dominant factor in those costs. Now, rediscovery of Marx's own idea of value, that idiosyncratic social historical polyform abstraction that we just discussed, happened progressively over the 20th century through a series or a set of unorthodox readers, starting with Isaac Illich Rubin, I.I. Rubin of 1924, continuing in Hans-Georg Bachhaus, and as we have looked at before some months ago, the new Marx reading, or the Neue Marx Lektur in the 1960s, which developed into value form theory, which was anticipated separately by the feminist economist Diane Elson in an influential article from 1979. Note 19. The term translated as value objecthood is the Wertgegenständlichkeit, which Marx introduces here. This just quickly is one of the many references to Shakespeare plays in Capital. A bawdy innkeeper who appears in the Henriade and the Merry Wives of Windsor quickly tells Falstaff with obvious sexual overtones in Henry IV, Part 1, Act 3, Scene 3, "Thou or any man knows where to have me, thou knave, thou." Note 30, ungraspable or unfassbar, that is, has the same double meaning, physically untouchable and incomprehensible. 31, expression of value and value expression, value relation of value. Let's see, our analysis, scare quotes, eine Gegenständlichkeit, which is translated here as something that has objecthood. And then 33, the Paris is worth a mass, which is a fairly famous thing. A statement attributed to Henry IV, who converted to Catholicism in order to hold on to the French crown. Marx uses the term Wertspiegel or value mirror here. That's 35. Wertstein, sometimes translated as value, existence, and to be worth, and also existence as value, is the term rendered as exists as value. And then 37, Samuel Bailey was a British political economist. And 38, Bergfestigung is the term translated throughout as determination of value. Marx sometimes uses the expression quid pro quo somewhat ironically. The phrase means an equivalent thing for an equivalent thing, this or that. Yet Marx's whole aim here is to show that a sensual, usable object is not equivalent to a value. Number 40. We're getting close to the end of this, thank goodness. The term translated as the linen value in the Leinwandwert, which evokes a construction found in English political economy. For example, coat value or cloth value. In a footnote, Marx comments on the construction and gives an example from a text by Samuel Bailey. People have used the notion of a commodity's coat value, Rockwert. Marx explains to speak of its value as represented through the commodity coats. Just as today, we still speak of the dollar value of this or that commodity. Linen, for instance, has a certain coat value, or as Bailey put it, coat value, that is one word. More specifically, 2 coats would be the coat value of 20 yards of linen, according to Marx's hypothetical exchange relation. We remember these examples, right? The 20 yards of linen equaling 1 coat. The concrete version of all that linen, and then the more abstracted version of the constructed coat, which in some cases requires, people. Does require people to create it. Now, Marx himself employs the construction differently, and in his case, it has an oxymoronic character because he does something English political economists did not do. That is, develop a theory of how commodity value is a non-physical social substance, that is, objectified abstract labor. That's what I just mentioned in talking about Well, it's not the coat and the linen. It's really about, you know, who was engaged in sewing and cutting and fitting and patterning and what, et cetera. As such a substance, value can't actually have become bound up with the physical thing, linen. The linen value, der Leinwandwert, as Marx uses it, signifies the value component of the linen commodity or the value contained in the linen commodity. And so a couple of things from Aristotle, 43, mercantilism was a term used by the generation of economists and economic historians that followed Adam Smith to classify the form of political economy they saw as dominant in early modern Europe. After Smith, who described it slightly differently as the mercantile system, the term mercantilism came to denote the opposite of the kind of free trade economy that he actually advocated. The main actor in mercantilist theory and practice is the nation state. The main impulse is to guard and keep the nation's wealth within that nation, that is protectionism. And this requires, at least in theory, that the state strenuously regulate the economy. Now, that's the implicit thing with Trumpism, right? That Trump is engaged in protectionist practice by emphasizing tariffs and tariff barriers and all that sort of stuff. And yet he'll claim in the same breath, well, we believe in a free market and, blah, 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 deregulation, when in fact it is, a tariff is regulating exchange. 44, Lombard Street. 45, explaining Erschein alts again. 46, Bestimmungen, use it as it is employed in post-Kantian philosophy during this era. That is to indicate the set of characteristics that distinguish one thing from other things. It could be rendered according to the context as definitions, determinations, framework, parameters, or properties. The related adjective bestimmt often, although not always, indicates a particular something as opposed to a general condition or universal principle. 47. When Marx uses the word fetish and fetishism from the Portuguese fetico, nay, Latin factitius, is he is not thinking of their history. But the history is there nonetheless. These words were, to put it neutrally, one European way to come to terms with alien cultures, specifically with African gods and beliefs and ritualistic practices regarding them. Long in use by European traders with West African peoples, fetish was put to theoretical use by the French philologist and historian of culture Charles de Brosse in his 1760 treatise on non-Christian religion, called the Dieu fétiche ou parle d'ancienne religion d'Asie avec la religion actuelle de Nicotée. For de Brosse, a fetish was a sacred object believed to have intrinsic supernatural power, the distinctive mark of an alien religion. Already here in protocultural anthropology, the word was being used to make distinctions within European discourse as much as between Europe and Africa. And you can really see where this is coming from, right? Friedrich Schelling, a pivotal figure in the philosophy of German idealism, used the term fetishism to signify not the power itself, but a dangerous attitude towards the supposed power inherent in inanimate objects. He called this attitude stupid Verehrung, a stupefying adoration excited by an object and a universal human being viewed philosophically. Leaning on and also obscuring its old connections, Schelling understood fetishism as a general possibility of mind, an attitude of beyond and against rational consciousness. His friend Hegel went further and described fetish as, quote unquote, a putrid Portuguese word for a naive intuition of the true power of human thought, that is, Geist, falsely projected onto external objects. For a critique of this notion is reinforcing position in the ideology of global colonialism, and there's a text by Lauren Mattery, The Fetish Revisited, Freud, Marx, Freud, and the Gods Black People Make. That's probably a really good text. particularly since it's published by Duke University. 48. In the original German, Marx's Chiasmus reads as follows: Sachliche Verhalte der Personen und Gesellschaft Verhaltenisse der Sachen. Sachlich, the adjectival form of Sache, is a word with a wide range of meanings: expert, professional, factual, physical, thingly, and so forth. Marx activates several of these meanings in Capital. Above all, though, he uses the term sachlich to evoke and analyze what capitalism does to the relations between people and the things they make. In another chiastic moment, he speaks of the personification of things and the thingification of people. Towards the end of the book, moreover, he defines its subject as follows: capital isn't a thing. Rather, it is a social relation between persons that is mediated by things. See, this is that moment that I always thought would be important for why you talk about design. That is, it is the, it's the mediation of social relations because of the role of designing for use or for exchange. But anyway, of the various meanings of Sach, a term whose history stretches back to legal discourse of the 9th century CE, where it signified a dispute to be settled by a judge. The key meaning here is that of a material thing made by human subjects. The German word Ding, a cognate of the English term thing, resembles the English term in being more of a catch-all signifier, but sachlich also describes the abstract human labor encased in Sachen, that is, labor products. That labor may not be a physical thing, however, in its objective state, that is, as value, it has a special objecthood and thus thing-like properties. Having stressed that not even an atom of natural material goes into this value objecthood, Marx later writes that the equality existing among different things of human labor takes on the thingly, sachliche, form of labor products equal value objecthood. So, the objectified abstract labor that is encased in and very different from its thingly husk is itself thingly in the sense of thing-like. At times, moreover, it can be hard to tell whether Marx is using sachlich to signify thing-like, that is, something that is more like a sock in the sense of a man-made physical object, but not actually a sock in that sense, or to signify that something does, in fact, have the properties of such a thing. Since the English word thingly has both meanings, thing-like and relating to a characteristic of things, it preserves this ambiguity, which is why it's the preferred term for sachlich in this translation. So you can see they're really digging down and dirty into all of the little things that are part of the semantics of this. There's a thing that refers to Luke 23:34, Gospel of John, Latin phrase after the fact, ex post facto, and something that doesn't work in English. 53, note 53, Max Werth is serving here as a typically obtuse economist. Given that he wrote books and articles for popular audiences in Germany and Austria, his name was a German readers were likely to recognize. 54. The European family is described at several other moments in Capital as having a spontaneously arising, a Naturwurzeln, a division of labor, a spontaneously arising division of labor. Where this happens, an implicit comparison is being made. On one side is a division of labor within the family in which women perform unpaid labor within the home while men work outside the home in the zone of production for wages. Marx implicitly compares this spontaneously arising division to what he considers the unnatural division of labor between the worker class and the owner class in a capitalist society, which he wants to critique. The comparison itself has become the object of critique because it appears to raise the critique of political economy above the equally necessary critique of patriarchal power relations. Below the surface of this comparison lie assumptions about sexual difference and the relative values of what Marx refers to controversially as productive and reproductive labor, which feminists, but not only feminists, have been calling into question almost since the book's publication. Yeah, this is a definitely an important literature, and it is a sub-literature in economics, among other fields, to talk about these kinds of ideas. I mean, derived from this kind of discourse, but there's an entire parallel kind of thing that exists during the Victorian period that is rife for analysis and forms that kind of basis for talking about gender difference, sexuality, the construction of all kinds of stuff that is really interesting about the late 19th century, and at least in English. As early as 1884, however, Frederick Engels revised the premise that the family order was natural in his book, The Origins of Family, Private Property, and the State. The contemporary sexual division of labor came into being along with the legal institution of private property. And so, whether this assessment is historically correct or not, Engels' conceptual point is that the family division was a historical and not a natural fact about women and families. Marx himself may have also been interested in revising this assumption. In 1877, he made extensive notes on Lewis H. Morgan's book, Ancient Society. This is mentioned in Bellamy Foster, which argued that families had gone through a series of different structures over a specific history. In fact, these are the notes that Engels used after Marx's death as the basis for his book on the family. Regardless of the traditional roles women held in the European family unit, both Marx and Engels saw capitalism as drawing women and children too out of the home and into mechanized factories, making them de facto members of the proletariat. Although this did not mean they ceased to do the housework as well. Recently, this situation has come to be called the double burden of those who do wage work during some part of the day and unpaid domestic labor during another part. Along these lines, the Polish philosopher and revolutionary activist Rosa Luxemburg, who made important revisions to Marx's theory and founded the proto-communist Spartacus League in Germany, maintained throughout her writings that the emancipation of women, both economically and politically, was as crucial to the formation of a communist society as the emancipation of workers. She, too, returned to so-called primitive family structures, tracking the much more porous movement of women between households and external jobs in her book, The Accumulation of Capital. Since at least the 1970s, feminist thinkers have made precise incisions into assumptions made less by Marx than by Marxists, under the general critique that, as Heidi Hartman put in an influential essay, they subsume the feminist struggle into the larger struggle against capital. Now, this is actually a really important point, and one that is key in a lot of political organizations. And you begin to see this in if you're participating in discourse with groups that are, predominantly male voices, for example, whatever that means. The article is called, Heidi Hartman's article is called The Unhappy Marriage of Marxism and Feminism Towards a More Progressive Union in Capital and Class of Summer 1979. Two landmark books that explore the terms of a more progressive union are Maria Rosa Dalla Costa and Selma James, The Power of Women and the Subversion of the Community, and Sylvia Federici's Caliban and the Witch. 55. According to Epicurus, the gods lived in the intermundia, or the spaces between worlds, and didn't influence the development of the world or the lives of people. That Marx's text has formulas, formeln rather than forms, formen, here is due likely to a printer's error, which is an interesting, God knows you could make a whole deal out of that. The sentence, a pearl or a diamond has value as a pearl or a diamond, which Marx sets outside his quotation marks, is in fact part of Bailey's text. 58, the last quote. The quote at the end of the chapter is from Shakespeare's Much Ado About Nothing, Act 2, Scene 3. Come hither, neighbor Seacole. God hath blessed you with a good name. To be a well-favored man is the gift of fortune, but to write and read comes by nature. So I finally got to the end of that. That's volume 1, chapter 1, the end of the editor's notes. And yes, there's a lot there. That's why I decided to go through this because, there's significant notes that regard the not just simply the translation at the language level, the lexical level, but conceptually, I think you can see explained here further, and perhaps not to your satisfaction, and maybe even not to mine, but the appearance question, questions of essence, questions of there's a lot of stuff there, and it's worth considering. Now let's see how much time I have left. I have gone over my time. Let me just make some general comments and then because we'll continue working on this same thing tomorrow in the next session. We'll be looking at finally chapter 2 on exchange. And we've gone through this in a somewhat tedious way, but chapter 2 is shorter, at least, and represents a whole bunch of other different things, some of which I will mention now in my closing moments of my yammering here. Soviet Stern has just put out, and this is from X or Twitter. He's, and I think it's a he, has done this incredibly laborious process of considering that you too can get through reading Capital by reading 11 or so pages a day, 4 days a week for 18 weeks. He does have a Twitter chat group in writing that is, that sort of accompanies this. And I don't know how he's constructed it. If you're really interested in this, my general perception of Soviet Stern is that he's a bit of an orthodox thinker, and his sort of interpretations are not using the Princeton edition, of course, but I'm sure he has a feeling about that as well. But he's working with the complete set that is online, that is at Marxist.org. And or the Penguin edition, if you want to be serious about this. And the good thing is that he kind of gives us a schedule for what we should do, how much we should sort of read every week, and pace yourself, right? The problem is, I don't like reading in these little blocks. I much prefer reading, the whole thing all at once. But that's just the way I work. But this is a rough ride, as he says. What I did, and he includes an animation. I won't show it now, but you may find that amusing as well, of all of his slides. So needless to say, this is, I assume, PowerPoint or something like it, and it has all of the different sections. I only took out a couple of slides because there's really a lot of slides. The point being, of course, that the argument is there is an argument. It's there. It resembles what we've been looking at with Higginbottom, but it does have a more orthodox flavor, which we can discuss at some moment. I drew out from his presentation the slide on the general formula for capital, because I think it at least tries to talk about MCM, CMC, M prime, all those things. And he tries to drive home chapter 18 on the formula for the rate of surplus value, other formulas and circuits of value stuff, the metamorphoses, volume 2, the turnover of capital, which we've sort of beaten to death recently. And the thing I was doing last week or the week before last, that the law, the tendency of the rate of profit to fall, and all of that. And you can see this is much more linear than the way some other people discuss it. I kind of like this use of the Simpsons cartoon or comic slide to try to work through volume 1, 2, and 3. May not work, but it's fun to look at anyway. And back to the schedule. And that's pretty much it. I did for today, and to perhaps lead into tomorrow is the idea of, and I mentioned this in lectures before or yammerings before, is about the money bin of Scrooge McDuck of the Disney cartoon. And so I've included the some of the images of bins, its definition, its history, and it actually has a really interesting history that Karl Barks sort of wades through in terms of value. And needless to say, it's anachronistic, but I find it useful and interesting. And of course, the history of the cartoons about the money bin are quite useful to get us to what we will probably do tomorrow. Is from Karl Marx, Volume 1, Capital, Princeton, the Princeton edition, which just came out in September. We're gonna do chapter 2. I'll just read it. It's not as long, and this is continuing talking about commodities. So I'll do that. I'll make a brief comparison, and you may find it interesting to look at yourself. And this is the online internet version of the 1867 version, which you can see is quite different from the Princeton translation. So I just include a little fragment that hopefully you'll appreciate the difference there. And so that's included in that. And you can see how short it was, right? This is the chapter 2. It's not as horrible as you think. So this is chapter 2 itself. And then the chapter notes, which we will go through because, as one knows, there's a lot more in here that is, the note references you can see in chapter 2, in the text of chapter 2. The note comes first, and then there's the lowercase Roman numeral editor's notes. And yes, there is a set of editor's notes as well. So here's the Marx's notes are here, and then there's the editor's notes, which are moderately lengthy, but well, they're not that bad actually. So we should be able to do all of chapter 2 tomorrow. And I will see you then, and I will thank you for your attention. Let's see if there's any comments or questions. Lane comments, a man can work from sun to sun, but a woman's work is never done. Indeed it is. So those are all of my yammering about for Weekly Marx on 28 December 29, tomorrow at 3 p.m. Gonna do more of it. More of this stuff. I get something from it. I hope you get something from it. And if you have comments or whatever, you can certainly send them to me within the context of the autonomouscollective.net Discord. We are on Blue Sky, well, as well as X, actually, Twitter. So, we're everywhere. Autonomous collective.net. Thank you. And now I shall kill the share and return us to our